I'm interested in your thoughts about what does government of national unity mean for us? Is it fragile or will it last 4 years? And what are the threats and opportunities for people like us working with the state and really relying on strong political will?
Thanks, Siv, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I mean, it's amazing to see all of you, and I mean, a fantastic venue, Nompilo, so well done on organizing this. So, I mean, I think it's a hugely significant thing, this government of national unity. I was in the US with Minister Parks Tau and Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield in July, talking about the GNU and obviously the AGOA issues. And we met with the National Security Council at the White House. And they are the most kind of powerful body in the administration because the US thinks of everything. In Washington, everything is seen through the lens of national security. And they said to us, you know, it's incredible. South Africa, like, has a democratic election, a free and fair election. You know, in this year of elections, there are many countries that are not having free and fair elections. And that's a very significant achievement. Secondly, your liberation movement that's been in power for 30 years accepts the results of the election. It's like, where does that happen? You know, the parties that are incumbents for so long accept the results of the election, don't contest the election. And thirdly, they then isolate the kind of the populist, extremist, I mean, normally parties revert to populism in these kinds of moments of stress, but the opposite happens in record time. I mean, you have many countries that go through months without being able to form governments. And they form a government which is about kind of protecting the constitutional center and the vision for South Africa that's embodied in the constitution. And it was quite interesting because I think we often don't think about that in South Africa, just, you know, how significant this moment is in our history, in our politics. And I think it has some very significant practical implications as well. And I had the opportunity to speak to the president during the GNU negotiations. And I had a very simple kind of message for him, and that is that his presidency, the sixth administration, but the one before this one, was essentially about reforms. I mean, it was interrupted by COVID, but the president is a reformist president, and he's not given the kind of acknowledgement and the recognition for how seriously not only he takes that, but the things that he's done to achieve that. And I mean, you will know with the Operation Vulindlela program, but just how much success there's been. It's interesting, you know, when a DA minister sort of says something, everyone is like lauding them, like, you know, you've done this amazing job, but exactly, but actually all of this work was done prior to this administration, actually. And the message that I gave was that if you want partners for your reform agenda, you will not find better partners than you have in the GNU. And if you look at the parties that chose not to form part of the GNU, there is no way that they would be supporting any of these things, including some of the things that were spoken about just now, you know. So actually, the perception of kind of ideological differences in the GNU, I think, are quite misplaced. I think if you look at the substance of what these parties are wanting to do, and a lot of it is just about fixing the country, it's about delivery, it's about, you know, providing services to those that most need it. But actually, you know, there's very strong alignment and agreement on all of that. And I think that's very significant because I think, you know, the president kind of made this comment in the meeting that, you know, he wants this seventh administration to be, he wants to turbocharge his reforms. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And I think we're going to see this across, and it's very interesting. We'll talk a little bit about the business partnership with government. I mean, it's very similar in many ways, and a lot of the learnings and so on from the story that we've just heard in DBE. But I think what you're going to see is, in the substance of this government, very strong commitment and action around driving reforms that are really going to change the trajectory of this country. So I'm very excited about that, and I think what you need to do with the GNU is kind of isolate the noise that happens, you know, the fights between Helen and Fakile and things like that, because actually it's distracting that. I mean, it's unhelpful because it's sometimes destabilizing for the GNU, but when you speak to people in the GNU, the commitment to what they're doing and the GNU project and the reform agenda of the president and what this government is about, I think is incredibly strong.
Fantastic. That's really, really good to hear. That's not in the news. I want to... Eddie, you made a reference to this, but one level down, which is bring it to really pragmatic focus. So you heard a little bit about the ECD sort of social compact. You heard, and it's relatively new. PYEI has been a great platform for incredible collaboration around livelihoods. Solidarity Fund, great example of a social compact. I'm interested in you reflecting on the national energy crisis and how business and government is working together. And Janelle, if you think you have a hard time, there are 3 ministers involved in energy, if you don't count Treasury, and a big monster state-owned enterprise. So that's a very, very complex problem to navigate. Start with just the headlines on what problem you are trying to solve, and then talk through what that compact actually, and why is it successful, and is it successful?
I mean, let's just start with the Solidarity Fund, actually, because I think that from businesses' perspective, the Solidarity Fund and Business for South Africa, I think were the sort of kind of, it pioneered a new form of relationship with government that business had never had before. And if I look at prior then, and I've been on the board of Business Leadership South Africa for about 12 years now, I'm the kind of gray hair on the board there. But, you know, there's been so many engagements with government, which are about, you know, these are the problems we face, and these are the kind of policies that we need, and this is what the country needs to see, and just constant kind of wheel spinning. And what happened in that crisis that I think was very significant, the first was that business came to the party with civil society, labor, and others and said, you know, we are here to put our shoulder to the wheel, but we're not going to create our own response to the health crisis. This is not about like, we've got our plans, you've got your plans, and we're going to kind of cooperate. It's like, there's one response, and that response is driven by the Department of Health and by the government. You know, you can only have one response to the crisis. Our job is to kind of support, augment, accelerate implementation, execution. We have certain, you know, like was being discussed in the previous session, business and civil society have certain capabilities, resources, capacity, speed of operation, which government doesn't have. And how do we bring those to support execution of government's plan? And I think what was very significant in the energy crisis was that business and government didn't sit down and say, you know, what are we going to do about this crisis? The president announced a plan called the Energy Action Plan in July of 2023. He said, 2022. He said, this is our plan. This is how we're going to fix the energy crisis. And the plan is very clear about exactly what the steps are. There are really kind of 3 constituent elements of the plan. The one is we need to improve generation capacity in the existing Eskom power stations as best we can. Okay, these are old power stations. They've got lots of problems. Some are going to close down, but we need to significantly improve the energy availability factor or the performance of the power stations. The second thing we need to do is we need to bring on as much new generation capacity as we can, as quickly as possible. So while we're trying to fix what we've got, we need to bring a lot of new capacity on. And the third thing we need to do is reform and modernize our energy system. So the monopoly of Eskom, we need to move beyond that, create an open market, bring down the price of electricity. And that modernization is something that, you know, 70 countries have done already, you know. So the great thing is, like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, you know, like there are, in fact, all of our BRICS peers have done this already. So we're very much kind of behind the curve on this. So it was very clear. And like the Solidarity Fund, we didn't come in and say, listen, you know, here's our plan for energy. It was like, we're behind your plan. We're 100% behind your plan. We're going to help support you to implement your plan. This is the president's plan. It's a cabinet-approved plan. And so, similar to the fund, what we did is we brought in what we thought were some kind of critical things that were needed in that partnership. So some of it was like resources. We need to send people to power stations. And there were hundreds of engineers and people who went into power stations to support. I mean, I think sometimes business kind of overblows that. I think it was important. I mean, you know, one of the reflections just on the previous discussion, and Grace touched upon it, which is really important, is how the importance of bringing humility into these relationships. You know, if you arrive and you've got like, we've got the answers, or you guys don't know what you're doing, or, you know, these sorts of things are, I mean, that's the fastest way to kill a partnership, and the truth is that there's lots of knowledge and capacity and skills and strength in all of these different kind of sectors, but there was a lot that was happening in Eskom, and I won't go through the kind of all of the details of how we turned the corner on that. But I mean, there was obviously support that was provided by business into the power stations. I think a critical thing that we did right in the early, and another point that Nicola made I think was key is our interlocutors, which are really in the OV team in the presidency, were absolutely critical. Without that team, this partnership would never have worked, and the leadership that was shown by Rudy in particular, but by that OV team and ultimately by the president. And political will, I think, is something we must not underestimate importance in these kind of difficult processes. But one of the things that the gaps that the presidency saw and we saw is the need for a program management capacity around the implementation of these plans. Because when you break down any of these things, it's like, okay, we need to fix the power stations or bring on energy. It's like there are 400 things that you need to do that, and some of these things have to happen sequentially. So if this deputy DG doesn't sign that letter on Monday, then nurses not able to apply themselves to, and then what often happens is that the letter just doesn't get signed, but no one's calling that person to say, listen, so when you have this all in a proper program management plan, I think there's the opportunity to really monitor and drive delivery and performance, because you can make sure that the things that need to happen are happening. So I think that program management capacity in the presidency was absolutely, in NECOM was absolutely critical. I think the other thing is kind of systems of accountability. So one of the things that's been very powerful in our process is we have a meeting every 6 to 8 weeks with the president and the ministers. And so we have a separate meeting with the officials, but there's a high level, let's call it, of the principals that meet every 6 to 8 weeks. And what's been very important in that process is to have a roadmap, have a critical path that says, because between the partners, you need to say, like, what does success look like here? How do we know whether we're succeeding or not? And a critical path helps. It's like, okay, by the end of the first quarter, these things need to have been done. This piece of legislation needs to have been signed. This regulation needs to have changed. We need to have issued this bid window. And what was really powerful in those meetings is there can be real accountability. I mean, in the first meeting I went to, my feedback from the energy grouping was on execution on our plan, I score us a 2 out of 10. And we can say that because, this is the purpose of this process, is to have these kind of open, honest engagements. And it's like, if we're not executing at 8 or 9 out of 10, we're just not going to get this done, but then when you have that kind of accountability and you have that, but it's also the framing of it is like, it's us that are executing. No one's pointing fingers at anyone. Okay, we're in this partnership together. I mean, the other thing that we said to ourselves very early on is like, failure is not an option here. I remember one of the business colleagues saying, but if government doesn't do this, we need to pull out. It's like, no. There's no pulling out, because there's no future here where we're able to help to build this country where we kind of pull out of a partnership because, something doesn't happen in the way that we want. So you have to be all in the relationship, and but it is important that you can have those kind of conversations, but the conversation is like, collectively we have failed to do this. It's not like, government, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's this is a plan that we jointly own and we jointly take accountability for. So I think there are a number of things. I mean, the final thing I would say, which I think was critical in the energy space, is I mentioned it, the kind of political will. And I mean, government and business and civil society are all complex, heterogeneous organisms. Okay, there's no kind of this is like one view that's reflected or one person that kind of makes all the decisions. But I think that having very strong political buy-in support that's visible is really important in a process like this. So, we sort of think of it in business like you need to create an unstoppable train behind a particular in our case, kind of reform agenda, but whatever the sort of changes that you're looking for. And you do that by mobilizing these kind of broader coalitions, but making sure that there's strong political support and buy-in. That doesn't necessarily mean that every single person supports it, but if the train is unstoppable, everyone eventually gets on board, and I think that was key. And then just the final thing that I think is really important, and I think, when thinking about it for DB and ECD, is it's really important to celebrate success. So what often happens is that, like, you're fighting. It's like, and challenges, and you just get over the hill, and there's like another mountain in front of you, and it's like you don't recognize, actually, that's an amazing achievement that we got over that hill, and because kind of success breeds success. And so, one of the things we've been really trying to focus on is not just with each other to celebrate success. And we had a great opportunity to do that actually at our last meeting with the president, where we could say to the team at Eskom, well done, you guys have done an incredible job. I mean, the poor team from Transnet was sitting next to them and they were about to get a roasting. But it's important, those people have worked hard, they've delivered well, and it's important to have those moments of in front of everyone like that, and the president and so on, to recognize that kind of success. And that also drives behavior and motivation. So, I mean, that's another important thing to remember.
Those are very specific and pragmatic lessons. I hope Janli and Tammy are partners in the program management unit of the writing notes. In other words, when's the next party to celebrate success? Thanks, Adi. I want to ask a few questions about that. So talk a little bit about the creation of coalitions, because, I mean, often from the outside, it can feel like business is all united. And so I'm interested in this question of humility. What does it mean? How do you get there? Because businesses are very proud of what they do and are not very often humble about expertise in the state. I mean, what work is needed for coalition building? What's your lessons there?
I mean, the one thing that actually kind of cropped up in the last, I found it fascinating listening to the last discussion, but that came up very strongly for me is, I think it's very important, and I saw this in the GNU process, the relationships that you build, and, speaking, coming from business, and I've kind of worked in the public sector, but so I have some understanding, but for most business leaders, like the public sector and government is like Mars for them. It's such a, and I'm sure for many civil society organizations as well, government is like this, and their understanding of government is basically what they read in the newspapers, and it's a huge limitation, I think, in many of these partnerships, is the kind of the assumptions and the preconceptions people have when they're engaged with their government counterparts. And so the relationships and the mutual understanding, taking time to understand each other. We had a really interesting set of engagements with COSATU actually during the capture years as business. We had a number of business leaders and we met with the COSATU leadership. We went away for 2 days. And really it was to discuss, how we were jointly going to work together to address the issue of state capture and to kind of rescue our democracy. But like the first morning, people just told their stories. Where am I from? What's important to me? What life have I led? What role do I play? What's important to me in my job and what I'm trying to do in the work that I do? And what happens is that, like, you start to understand the person that you're dealing with. It's not like, I see this person is like a DBE person, so I have certain sort of assumptions, But also you start to build relationships like that. And you don't build relationships on video calls and on, email, and you build relationships face to face with quality time, getting to understand each other, understand the needs, the constraints, what are the fears that we have, in these relationships. So I think taking the time for that and investing in that, I think, is really important. And if I look at we had our launch of the second phase of our partnership with the president last week. It was the time that I was very recently in my suit and tie. But you look at the relationships that now exist between these business leaders and DGs and government ministers and the president. It's transformational what's happened in the last 18 months. And the quality of our interactions as a result of that are just completely different.
Wow, that's really answers your question, Debo, about what we can do. That's really. Talk to us about what happens on a bad day, because you're describing all these very wonderful. Give us some examples of what happens when it goes wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what often happens when things go wrong, when things don't go according to plan, is that people they retreat into their kind of zone of comfort, which is, in the case of business, it's like, this government, they don't know what they're doing. It's like or we need to present them with an ultimatum, or to get people to do things like they should. And I think on government side, it's to see business as just kind of self-interested, and they're just in it for themselves, and so I think that what's important on both sides is to have voices in the room that kind of bring people back to the project and what we're trying to do, and to kind of be able to clear through the noise. And ultimately, my experience in these things, as I was saying earlier around the GNU, is everyone who I've experienced in these processes, whether they're government people or business, they're all committed patriots. These are people who love this country, they believe in the country, they will do anything and they will make huge personal sacrifice to see things shift. And I think people just need to be reminded of that sometimes. And so when things are wobbling, you just need some adults in the room. Unfortunately, we've had that on both sides in our process. Yeah.
So Eddie, you've been really active, even though always known to the room, very active in creating a very, now I think, a mature coalition around youth livelihoods. PYEI, our work in Narambia over 13 years is now really an amazing business, government, civil society partnership. An emerging compact we just heard about on ECD and children. Having been in that engagement, what's your advice to the room about what's next and what we should look out for, and guidance for ensuring that we stay the path on continuing this path of scale and compacts?
I mean, I just think there's a huge window of opportunity over the next few years that we need to be jumping through.
Yes.
And windows open and close, but I think the opportunity to do things differently, to experiment, to build new forms of partnership, I think there's such an openness on kind of all sides. And I think that we're in a moment where there's a tailwind of kind of hope that we have as a society. If you look at our post-94 trajectory, we had 20 years where pretty much like every year was kind of better than the last year. Country was getting wealthier, was employing more people, infrastructure was improving, housing, electricity being rolled out. And then for the last 10 years, kind of every year has been a bit worse than the last year. We've had 10 years, since 2014, on most indicators you look at, the country has been getting in decline. We've been getting poorer, infrastructure has been weakening, the state of local government and service delivery, on most metrics that you look at. And obviously we had the huge kind of knock of COVID, which I think we're still struggling to recover from. But we're at a moment now where I think this year's better than last year, and next year's going to be better than this year. And I think the country is seeing that, markets are seeing that. You see it in the rand, you see it in investor sentiment, and I think that's going to continue to grow. But in this kind of atmosphere of hope and possibility, I think we have a huge opportunity. And so I would kind of encourage us to be putting everything we can into rebuilding the country, like during this time. I think that I'm hoping this window will stay open for a long time, but I think the window staying open for a long time will depend a lot on what we in this room do over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And so I think if we show real tangible wins and successes. I mean, another interesting thing about the kind of GNU that I tell both of the parties is, like, you guys are not competitors with each other. Actually, you fish in different voting pools, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And when there's a positive perception of the GNU, actually both do well. If you look at the recent Social Research Foundation research that came out, actually both the ANC and the DA have done extremely well since the formation of the GNU. And so politically, I think there's a lot invested in wanting to make sure that the GNU is a success, but the GNU is only a success if it's felt in the lives of people across the country, and in particular the people that need it the most.
It's a really powerful reminder about the limitations of open windows. If you wanted to stay longer, we've got to make this window work. So foot on the accelerator is what you're saying. Throw everything at this. So yeah, electricity will get better, economy will grow, and impact will get better. These guys. Last question, Adrian, last subject to talk about before Nompilo takes over. The thing that surprised me most coming into Yellowwoods is I came into Yellowwoods with this very clear belief that strategy wins. And I remember listening to one of your conversations where you said, we don't back ideas, we back people. A real strong focus on people. So you've already started to talk about that. But just lessons about us as individuals, as leaders, and how to grow more leaders. And this sort of questions, you may not have an answer for this, but it's the questions we should be leaning into in this room as a community. What are those big questions for you about the challenge of leadership, the opportunity of leadership, and how do we replicate ourselves or grow ourselves?
I'm not sure I can answer the last question, but I mean, just on the kind of importance of leadership and the way that we think of it, you know, from a Yellowwoods lens, actually, we think of it as much in the social enterprises that we're involved in as we do in the businesses, is that, and I think we heard this story in the previous panel that I mean, it was summarized actually in I think it was Mike Tyson who says, you know, no strategy survives the first punch in the face, you know.
Yes.
It's like you go into the ring and you've got a plan, and then you get smacked in the face, and it's like, okay, the plan goes out the window. You know? And that's our experience of business and social enterprises, these relationships. Is like what you think is going to happen is not what you know when you start, is that your plan is not going to materialize. What you imagine is going to happen is not going to happen. Something different is going to happen. And your ability to react and to respond to that, to try to anticipate that, ultimately is going to be the determinant of whether you're successful or not. And in these kinds of partnerships, it's the ability of the partnership to understand how the context of that partnership is changing, and how to respond to that, and how to constantly be evolving what we're doing, and the form of the work that we're taking to evolve to the kind of circumstances and the context that we're operating in. I think that's really important, and it comes back to a lot of the things that we've spoken about. You know, I think relationships I mean, the quality of leadership is absolutely fundamental on all sides, and if you don't have that and you have a break somewhere, that can be fatal. You know, one of the things that we've learned, and I think this is an important lesson, is where you have the wrong leader, it's hard to scaffold them. Where you have the wrong leader, you need to change them. And that's as true for business as it is for government, as it is for the social sector. So I think that a kind of focus on the importance of leadership, the focus on the importance of the relationships, and the kind of commitment to a set of ends and a set of goals, I think is kind of, you know, what's really critical. I mean, I'm not sure how you build the community of leaders. I mean, I think this is an amazing gathering. You know, maybe it's more of these kinds of processes, you know, where people have the opportunity to learn from each other, to interface with each other, to be supported by each other. I mean, I think that's really important.